William Watson, who's a professor at Colorado Christian, who also, he went to Talbot Seminary and has a PhD in British history, I think the 16 and 1700s, and he got interested in studying the eschatology of the Puritans in the area in England, and now he's expanding out to even pre-publishing to manuscripts and things like that. And he's, in the last year or so, he's found a bunch of new stuff that's relating to prophecy. And he had written a book called Dispensationalism Before Darby, which has a lot of interesting stuff that relates to our prophecy. And what people are finding is there's more and more people out there who maybe didn't believe exactly like us, but believed a lot like us, who the historians in the church have not generally recognized that. So he's doing a great service to show that, especially after the Reformation or during the Reformation and afterwards, there are more people than people used to think that hold a lot of our views. And so he's going to have another disclosure today. This is, I think, his fourth time, I think, here. And so he's going to be talking about the Antichrist. Yes. You want me to show you how to do that?
I got it.
Okay. That's it. You're doing it. He's going to be talking about the rapture, the Antichrist, and rebirth of Israel in medieval manuscripts. So, Bill, take it away.
Thank you. Am I hooked up? Yeah, you're on. I mean,
except for the PowerPoint thing.
I have to say that coming here to the Pre-Trib conference, there are some great preachers. I'm not one of them. And some great theologians. I can't keep up, I think. But one thing I'm good at is I'm a historian, and I'm a nerd who loves to dig through archives. And in fact, it's great being a teacher because you get 3 months off in the summer, 3 weeks off during Christmas, and of course a week in Easter and a week for Thanksgiving. All that free time, I guess I could just relax, but I love digging through archives. So a year and a half ago, that would be the summer of 2016, my wife and I went to the UK, and through Airbnb we found a place to stay for a while, and I dug through the National Archives. Actually, my book, Dispensationalism Before Darby, was on the 17th and 18th century, and that's my specialty really as an historian of 17th and 18th century English history. And what was really neat is everything that's ever been published from Gutenberg to 1800 is now online if you have $1,000 for a subscription. And even our library, they have to pay a $5,000 subscription for a library subscription, and they can't afford that either. But I'm often an adjunct professor at University of Colorado Boulder, and so I get access to their library and I can get in. And I've done all my research, and it took me 7 years to put together my book and I'm pretty confident I've read all the eschatology that has been published in English up through 1800, which was the year that Darby was born. And of course, I got sick and tired of people saying, you know, Darby invented all this, it's new, so it must not be real. And when I heard it so often, I said, wait a minute, I've spent my life reading documents, manuscripts, or published material in that time, and I run across this stuff all the time. So I decided to write that book, and I spent 7 years doing it. Now they can't get me. Oh, I back up. Okay. Anyway, that was, of course, 2 years ago when the book came out, and a year ago last summer, we went to the UK, and I decided I've read everything published. I want to read manuscripts, things that aren't published. And so we went to the National Archives, the British Library, Oxford University. They have some great stuff at the Bodleian in old manuscripts. My intention was really just to read the letters of the clergymen in my first book, Dispensationalism Before Darby, which is 17th and 18th century. But as I was digging along, and I also went, Bristol Baptist Church, the Bristol Baptist College, the oldest Baptist college in the world. It was founded in 1659, I think, and it's still going. And their new librarian has gone through their basement and dug out manuscripts. And really, a lot of these are Baptist pastors from the 17th and 18th century that never published their works, but they wrote in blank books, with little pencil lines in manuscript as they were teaching through the book of Revelation. What I did was I only looked at their commentaries and journals if they were teaching through Revelation or Thessalonians, Romans 9 to 11, chapters 9 to 11, any eschatological passages. Then I went, of course, to Zechariah and Ezekiel 38 and 39. If anyone had a handwritten manuscript in book form, they would just write in the books, blank books, of Ezekiel 37, 38, 39, I would key right into that, and I have troves of this stuff that I've been, copying frantically while I was there, and I still have to put it together. You're not going to hear that. What you're going to hear really are the results of, when I was at the British Library, I just, manuscripts, computers can't pick up every word in a database like printed material. But the book that I have out there, in fact, if I put a plug for my book right through that door, Dispensationalism Before Darby, every word of every book ever published through 1800 is in their database. And so I just typed in Rapture, and I found in every book that had the word Rapture anywhere in that book came up a whole list of a good 100, maybe 150 books. And of course, once I went to it online, it was even highlighted the word Rapture so I could find it on the right page, what page number it was on and everything. Easy picking. And then, in fact, I had so much on the Rapture, I did a Rapture in the 17th century and a Rapture in the 18th century. And then I typed in dispensation. And all the past, now sometimes it was a special dispensation from the Pope or something like that, and I didn't worry about that. But if it said in the dispensation of grace or the dispensation of the law, boy, I picked up on that right away and have a chapter on that. And another one, two chapters on Israel or Jew and showing the rebirth of Israel and expectation for that. You'll hear some of this today. But the big trove that I found was, this is my book, Dispensationalism Before Darby, but on the right, I found a early 15th century Gothic, it's written in Gothic script. I had to spend some time teaching myself to read Gothic and struggling through that, but I got pretty good by the time I was through with the 10-page manuscript. And it is called A Treatise on the, here, just a minute, I'll turn to the next page here. Again, can you read that? I guess it's small, but if you have a screen, some of you have it's on the disc, and you can enlarge it and take a closer look and see if you can read it. But basically, it's titled, Here Beginneth the Treatise of the Coming of Antichrist. Now, this was dispensationalism before Darby, but it's also dispensationalism even before Luther. Because early 15th century, 1400, in fact, the archivist there, I talked to him and he said, I've looked at this and I think that from the script and the word usage, the spelling of the words, that you can zero in it to the decade between, what was it, 1500 and, that's 16th century, 1400 and 1410. So very early 1400s, which is just about the time of Wycliffe and Chaucer. And it's really written in Chaucerian or Wycliffian English, that period. Middle English it's called. Anyway, and so let me read a little bit of it for you. And I thought, this is a trove. Then I Googled, and Google has nothing on it. To the best of my knowledge, this manuscript has never been cited. Now, I did find through Google that it was cataloged a couple times. One in 1580s and about 1680s, I think it was. It was cataloged as being in the collection of the British Library, British Museum, it was at that time. But anyway, no one has ever, I don't know if anyone's even read it, except for the archivist. And that excites a historian when they find something that no one else has found before. Anyway, it's a Gothic manuscript in Middle English, about 1400, maybe 1410 at the latest. And it was found in the British Library, never cited. Interesting is he cited the same passages we always go to. Thessalonians, Ezekiel, all the passages Darby cited. And really my proof is that Darby didn't come up with any of this. My next project is to go and try to read Darby's letters, which most of them are in Belfast and in Dublin, Trinity College Dublin and Queen's College Belfast. And that's going to be my next project. Maybe we'll go to Ireland next summer. Because I want to know what Darby read, what influenced Darby. And I think he read a lot of the stuff that's in my book Dispensationalism before Darby. Or maybe everybody just got it from Scripture. Who knows? Anyway, so first he cited 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The Lord Jesus Christ not shall come into his judgment general till there that certain departing and diversion. In other words, there's got to be some kind of departing. And I thought, whoa, that's the rapture, isn't it? After studying it really hard, I don't think it's the rapture. I'm always looking for the rapture. But that into that certain departing and diversion been first coming, and that the son of perdition, that is to understand Antichrist, shall show himself. 4 things principal which shall precede the coming of Antichrist, the son of perdition. So there are 4 things that have to happen before the Antichrist comes. The first shall be the division or separation of countries and lands that shall depart from the empire of Romany, shall be divided into 10 realms. See, the X is Roman numeral 10. 10 realms, as is written in Daniel chapter 7, one of our favorite eschatological passages. And figure in the beast that has 10 horns in Revelation 13. So he's tied in the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He's tied in the 10 horns of the beast in Revelation. And what he said is that the author of the book, it's anonymous, by the way. Back in the Middle Ages, no one really signed their works. I guess they wanted to give the glory to God. And it's hard to really know who it was. And I've still tried to identify, could it have been a Lollard, a follower of John Wycliffe? Or was it maybe a monk? I don't think the monk was really conformable to Rome, but there were sometimes groups of monks, especially among the Franciscans, who were not too obedient as maybe the Dominicans would be obedient to the authority of the church. But anyway, so there is this separation of Rome into 10 nations, which we heard a little earlier this morning, in fact, in that talk. Let's go on. Then the second thing that shall precede in the coming of the said Antichrist shall be the division of churches, particularly that shall separate from the obedience of the church Roman. Right away I thought, maybe it is a Lollard. He's kind of talking about people separating from the Roman church. The separation, diversion, and departing of many Christian people that shall depart from them the faith, calling this, right at the apostle in 1 Timothy 3. Let's go on to the next one. Antichrist shall come when the sin shall be abundantly multiplied upon the earth at that time. As is said in Matthew chapter 24, once again, Matthew 24, the chapters we use, shall abound, and the charity of many shall wax cold before the cursed Antichrist come upon the earth. In other words, a time when sin abounds, love grows cold and disappears. The Antichrist shall be born in Babylon of some Jews which shall be in the line of Dan, after the prophecy of Jacob in Genesis chapter 49. If some of you are familiar, remember Jacob was getting very old and he was blessing all of his sons and prophesying over each one of them. And he talked about Dan would be a serpent. And I'll get to people before this, because obviously I'd like to see the influences of Darby, but I also would like to see what influenced and the author of this manuscript. And I'll get to that as our time goes on. So Antichrist will be born in Babylon from the tribe of Dan. Of course, Dan he gets from, another thing is he mentioned that Dan was not mentioned among the 12 tribes of Israel in the 144,000 in Revelation. And so, why? Because Dan is like Judas was to the 12 disciples, so Dan was to the 12 tribes. Anyway, again, this is just speculation. And by the way, again, I'll say I'm not a theologian. I'm a historian. I just get excited about the different views, and I want to present those views to you. If you're interested, do more research on your own. I've got footnotes. But there's not only is my PowerPoint on your disc you've been given, but so is my paper. My paper is replete with footnotes where you can do your own research. And I would say most of the stuff that I'm presenting today, you don't have to have $1,000 to get to. It's on Google. I mean, just Google it and you'll find them there pretty handy. Anyway, because a lot of stuff has been downloaded into the internet now. Antichrist shall go into Jerusalem, into the temple that the Jews have then made and redevised. A rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. But throughout my talk today, I want to remind you that many people will say, well, this is really dispensationalism. I say, what does it take to be dispensational? It has to be exactly like Darby. And then there's no one exactly like Darby, so that they haven't found dispensationalism. I say it is a heck of a lot closer to dispensationalism in Darby than what you see with the Amill people and those people that don't even talk about prophecy at all. And my point here is, throughout church history, people have thought eschatologically. They've looked for the coming of the Messiah. They've wondered what was going to happen before the Antichrist come. Who would the Antichrist be? Speculation has been throughout the history of the church until the 21st century. Anyway, let's move on. So Jews will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. The Antichrist will enter it and claim to be the Messiah. And by the way, I would say the overwhelming consensus in the first 1,000 years of Christianity is it would be a Jew, because the Jews would receive them as the Messiah, but he would be the false Messiah. Anyway, the last days of the world shall be in time of the said Antichrist. The time shall be quite perilous. For at the coming of Antichrist, men and women shall sin so openly that they shall have no shame to do and accomplish their lecheries. And I would say that's happening in America today. Anyway, there'll be a tribulation, open lecheries in the street with no shame whatsoever. So I've divided it into 3 parts: the Antichrist, the rebirth of Israel, or expectation of the rebirth of Israel, and then the rapture. I thought, hey, it's a pre-trib study group, I've got to talk about the rapture. By the way, I have so many other categories and files of stuff that I found, but I couldn't fit them all into one talk, so I've just had these 3 topics. First, the Antichrist. Now, here's a quote from Norman Cohn, who wrote Pursuit of the Millennium, published by Oxford University Press, in which he said, already in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, theologians were foretelling that Antichrist would be a Jew of the tribe of Dan. This idea became such a commonplace that in the Middle Ages it was accepted by scholastics such as Thomas Aquinas. Antichrist, it was held, would be born in Babylon, would grow up in Palestine, and would love Jews above all peoples, and he would rebuild the temple and gather them together from their dispersion. And again, I would say every single source in the first 1,000 years, this was the narrative. I wanted to quote a secondary source, but let's go to only primary sources now. I was taught at the University of California to be a bean counter, to find all the primary sources you can, and so I'm going to be prepared to drink from a fire hose, because I've got to pick up my speed here. The earliest example I found of something like this was in the Apocalypse of Peter. Now, the Apocalypse of Peter actually made it as a questionable canonical source in the Muratorian canon, published about 180 AD, if you're familiar with it. It's a fragment that lists all of the books of the canon, but it also has the Apocalypse of Peter as questionable. Some churches believe it's canonical, most of us don't. If you've heard of the Apocalypse of Peter. It was in Koine Greek, of course, and here's a quote from it. "The fig tree is the house of Israel. When the twigs have sprouted, then feigned Antichrist shall come, the feigned Christ shall come. Jews will follow him at first, but Enoch and Elijah shall be sent to teach them that this is the deceiver." So the Antichrist will take over, but then Enoch and Elijah will come and preach for 3.5 years in the streets of Jerusalem. And then, of course, they will be martyred by the Antichrist. And the last 3.5 years, will be the time of the Great Tribulation. And so, notice Enoch and Elijah, and as early as, a quarter of a century or so, maybe 30 years after the apocalypse of John, we have this apocalypse of Peter. And Enoch and Elijah are identified as the two witnesses. I need to say that the 7 years that overwhelmingly most of the first 1,000 years of writings have, the 7 years is not based on the last week of Daniel. I found a couple that mentioned the last week of Daniel as those 7 years. Overwhelmingly, the 7 years were the 3.5 year periods of the witnesses testifying in the book of Revelation, the two witnesses. And everybody identifies them as Enoch and Elijah. I found a couple that said Enoch and probably Elijah, but it could be Moses. No, I said not, always Elijah. Elijah, and most say Enoch, and some question whether it's Enoch or not. It could be Moses, or one of them even said Jeremiah, of all things. But again, 100% said Elijah, and 95% said Enoch, along with Elijah, as the second witness. Of course, because they were both translated, or raptured already, and then could return. Anyway, let's go to Irenaeus. Now, Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of the Apostle John. So we have two generations. And he identifies the restrainer as the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire falls, it will be divided into 10 kingdoms. Back into the 2 legs, like we heard this morning, and then the 10 toes. And those 10 toes would be the 10 tribes, or the 10 horns in Revelation. Same theme. But are taken over by the Antichrist. Because the Antichrist is that little horn that rises up, conquers 2 of the horns, and then the other 8 of the horns tend to fall into line and follow the Antichrist, is the overwhelming consensus of the sources I found. And again, I found lots of sources. I guess I could talk about my method of finding all these. Schaff was, I have my own copy of Schaff, all his church fathers in my office. And to be honest, I didn't read every single page of all those volumes of Schaff. They have indexes in the back. And so I would look up Antichrist and find every instance. And then I looked up the indexes are not just by subject like Antichrist or Rapture, but also Bible verses, every Bible verse that is quoted. So, as a historian, if you can find a good index, you're halfway there. But, and of course, then I would look up, Thessalonians passages, citing Thessalonians, or Ezekiel 38, 39, this kind of thing, and go through all the typical passages that we use. And if Jerome or Augustine or someone cites those passages, it probably has something to do with the Antichrist or the Rapture or the Tribulation or some kind of eschatological idea. And as I say, with my first book, I spent 7 years doing this, summers. Maybe I take a week off in the summer for a holiday with my wife. There she is over there. But the rest of the time, I continued putting my 8 to 5 in at the office. And most universities, all the professors are gone. I'm in my office, if I'm not in an archive in the UK, digging around there. But anyway, let's go to Irenaeus. 10 kingdoms. And then he says the Antichrist will be a Jew from the tribe of Dan, who rules the world from Jerusalem, a messianic impostor, Jesus' evil twin, and he rules for 3.5 years. That's the last 3.5 years. Now, I'm not taking away, when I say 3.5 years, from the 7-year tribulation. What they're doing is dividing that 7 years into 2 3.5 year periods. Enoch and Elijah, of course, prophesy in the first 3.5, and the last 3.5, they've been killed, they've been resurrected. Well, I've got about a dozen of them that say when Enoch and Elijah are resurrected, the church is resurrected too. That's a mid-trib rapture, I would say. And I would say, I don't put down the mid-trib rapture folks. After all, they're halfway there. Okay. And if it ends up that we've got to go through the first 3.5, I won't be brokenhearted, as long as we don't have to go through the last 3.5. Anyway, and basically, even the mid-trib rapture people are saying that we are raptured from the ragings of the Antichrist. And I've got dozens of them. Wait till we get to them. When we get to the rapture, we're still on the Antichrist. Anyway, by the way, that's in Against Heresies. You can see I have a short footnote here, Against Heresies. But if you want the fuller footnotes, just go to my paper, which is also downloaded on the disk. Well, let's go to Hippolytus of Rome. Hippolytus was also a disciple of Irenaeus, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of the Apostle John. So it's 3 generations, mainly writing in Rome, Hippolytus of Rome. He said the Antichrist would be a Jew of the tribe of Dan, rebuild the temple, desecrate it. The Jews would follow him until Enoch and Elijah preached. And of course, Elijah is to call the fathers and the sons together. I mean, that Elijah would really be the calling of the Jews, the conversion of the Jews. And he would rule for 3.5 years. That's the last half of the tribulation, right? And you can see the sources there. Let's go to Tertullian. By the way, I think it was Wayne House that mentioned the Tertullians on the resurrection of the flesh. This is from his work on the resurrection of the flesh. Falling away, of course in 2 Thessalonians 2 there will be a falling away, and then the man of sin will be revealed, who is the Antichrist. He who now hinders, what obstacle is there to hinder but the Roman state? Once again, that hindering that they thought of in 2 Thessalonians 2 was the fall of the Roman Empire. When Rome falls, the Antichrist will be revealed. And I speculate, and some have mentioned, if Rome falls and the Antichrist is revealed, who's the Antichrist going to be? Well, when the Roman Empire fell, the Roman Pope took over power in Rome. Maybe it's the papacy. On the other hand, Rome continued in the eastern half of the Roman Empire until the Turks took over Constantinople. So maybe the Antichrist will be revealed after the fall of Rome, and the fall of Rome would be Constantinople, which is the second Rome, and that would be then the Turks, and the Muslims could be the Antichrist. I'm just speculating, but let's, again, I'm full of speculation. You pick up the ball and carry it the next round if you'd like, and go in the direction you want. But anyway, so the Roman state, the falling away of which will be scattered into 10 kingdoms. And that shall introduce the Antichrist, because the Antichrist will be an 11th kingdom who will then subdue those 10 kingdoms and rule the world. That's Tertullian. Of course, you can see his dates. About 220 is the closest I could come to when he wrote on the resurrection of the flesh. Then Victorinus of Petrovium. Petrovium is actually not far from modern-day Ljubljana. Do you know where Ljubljana is? The capital of Slovenia. So he was the bishop of what is now Slovenia in the Roman Empire. He was martyred by Diocletian, which definitely makes him ante-Nicene, before the Nicene Creed, Nicene Council. Anyway, he said that Antichrist would reign 3.5 years, the last half of the tribulation, of course. The beast belongs to the 7th horn, but is an 8th horn. The Antichrist comes to the Jews so that they might receive him as the Christ. The false prophet places an image of him in the temple. 144,000 are those among the Jews who will come to believe at the end of time through the preaching of Elijah. He doesn't mention Enoch, others do. But that Elijah will come in, to them, the 144,000 will be those Jews converted during the tribulation, period. Let's go on to the next. That was the 3rd century. This is the 4th century. The apocalypse of Elijah. Yes, I don't just mention church fathers. I started digging into those apocryphal works as well, or pseudepigraphal works. Anyway, it's a Coptic manuscript from the about 300. Antichrist will deceive the Jews who had settled in Jerusalem. Then he would stand in the holy place as an enemy to the saints. Until Enoch and Elijah come down, preach, then they're killed. Then Christ will come from heaven and set this earth on fire and spend 1,000 years on it. Millennial, definitely. Now, I'm looking for the rapture and I don't see it, but at least I see Enoch and Elijah, and I see the Antichrist and the rivalry they have between each other. That same narrative again of the last the first 3.5 years Enoch and Elijah preach, convert the Jews, and the last 3.5 years the Antichrist rules. Lactantius, about 320. The fall of Rome, there'll be 10 kings emerge. It's the same narrative every time, and it repeats itself for 1,000 years. I hope I don't bore you by going over the same story over and over again. But not only is it a consensus, I see it as unanimous in the first, and not unanimous in the early church. Let's go on. The Antichrist will be born a Jew of Dan, be born in Syria instead of Babylon. Elijah preaches and is killed and is wrapped into heaven. The Antichrist, being the little horn, tries to destroy the temple. There will be a tribulation as there has never been. Mark of the beast, 666, rules 42 months, 3.5 years. Assembles an army to destroy the righteous, surrounds the city of Jerusalem. God sends Christ and his angels from heaven to destroy the Antichrist. Then the resurrection takes place. I guess it's going to be post-trib, this guy was. But not everybody can be right. But anyway, and then there's judgment. And okay, let's go to Cyril of Jerusalem, about 350. The Antichrist will be a Jew of the tribe of Dan. He'll rebuild the temple. Then the little horn will rule cruelly for 3.5 years. The Antichrist will come when the destined period of the Roman Empire has run its course. Again, at the fall of the Roman Empire, Antichrist takes over. Elijah comes. Anyway, he will even sit in Christ's seat in the house of God, and God himself, this person whom Jews are expecting to come, will either be of the circumcision or at least circumcised himself, so that the Jews will have some confidence to believe him. That's really the narrative, is that the Antichrist has to be Jewish because the Jews are going to follow him, and the Jews wouldn't follow anyone but a Jew, and he's going to regather Israel, and he's going to rebuild the temple. He's got to be a Jew, not a Roman pope, not, a later secular ruler or a Muslim. Anyway, let's go on to Ambrosiaster. Ambrosiaster was a nickname given to some writings that people thought were Ambrose of Milan, but now we know they're not. I guess higher criticism or maybe philology, they've studied the word usage and whatnot and say it's someone posing. Maybe we could call him Pseudo-Ambrose, or Ambrosiaster is what's really stuck among scholars. And he was in Rome about 375, just before Augustine. Anyway, but after Constantine, right? Anyway, Paul pointed out that the time and the signs of Christ's return, the Lord would not come back until the Roman Empire fell and the Antichrist appeared, who would kill the saints. He would even sit in Christ's seat in the house of God, and as God himself, this person whom Jews are expecting to come will either be of the circumcision. Oh, I read that already. Cyril. Anyway, let's go to Hilary of Poitiers. Poitiers, of course, is in France. He was a French bishop, about 380. The Jews did not receive Christ, but they will receive the Antichrist in his work on the Trinity. Let's go to Jerome. Actually, Jerome maybe is a little early for medieval, but I had to fit him on this page. There was no room on the next. But anyway, Jerome, about 400. Translator of the Latin Vulgate, of course, if you know who he is. Antichrist at the end of the world is from the Jewish people. Pretending to be the Prince of the Covenant, he is to be born of the Jewish people and come from Babylon. Back to that same narrative repeated over and over again. Jews mistakenly imagine that he, their Messiah, is yet to come, for they are going to receive the Antichrist, not the true Messiah. Theodore of Cyrus, about 450. Rome falls. Rome's the restrainer. Same narrative, right? 10 kings, then the Antichrist from the north conquers everyone. Elijah and Enoch go to Jerusalem, call the Jews to faith, killed by the Antichrist. Not an isolated reading, but part of the large, widespread Elijah expectation in early Christianity. According to Joel Weaver, he wrote the book on Theodoret. Pseudo-Ephraim, I think I'm going to skip that because probably everybody here has heard of the work of Pseudo-Ephraim, and it's been presented here at this conference so many times. And people were excited that they found Pseudo-Ephraim, of course, especially on the Rapture. But according to Pseudo-Ephraim, Jew from the tribe of Dan, born of a vile virgin, and he rebuilds the temple. Gregory the Great, also heard earlier today, Gregory the First, the great pope, said that Antichrist would be a Jew from the tribe of Dan, takes over at the fall of Rome, which Rome being the restrainer. The Jews follow him, their conversion begins at his downfall. Oecumenius, about 600, he was a monophysitic Christian in Syria, who said, Elijah and Enoch prophesy in Jerusalem. They'll be killed by the Antichrist, who will then, for the last 3.5 years, rule as king of the Jews, whom he will deceive. Andrew of Caesarea, but there was a lot of Caesareas. Apparently, Caesar liked to name a lot of towns after himself. There's a Caesarea in Palestine, of course, and there are many other Caesareas. This Caesarea is actually in Cappadocia. which is eastern Turkey. And he was the bishop, really, of Cappadocia, Andrew of Caesarea. About 610 is when he wrote, and he said, the Antichrist will be from the tribe of Dan, out of which the Antichrist is born. The Antichrist will be coming from the eastern regions of Persia, where the Hebrew tribe of Dan is today. I've talked to people who think the Hebrew tribe of Dan is still around, and maybe the Afghanis are the Hebrew tribe of Dan. That's just speculation. You'd be surprised that now that I've written this book and people contact me and they want to share all their speculations with me about who they think the Antichrist is. And maybe if you've been an author of a book, you know the story. A lot of people contact you with their opinions and want you to accept their opinions. Okay, 8th century examples of the Jewish Antichrist. John of Damascus, Syrian monk who founded a monastery near Jerusalem. The Jews would accept him as Messiah in a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, at least until the preaching of Enoch and Elijah. Antichrist will rage, probably 3.5 years, I'm not sure if he mentioned the 3.5 years, until Christ returns. The Venerable Bede wrote a commentary on Revelation. Actually, before I began my research, I heard of the Venerable Bede. I thought he was an historian. But anyone here that Bede wrote a commentary on Revelation? Only one person here. It's two. When you start digging, this is fun. Anyway, for me it is at least. Anyway, the Venerable Bede, about 725, he wrote his commentary on the book of Revelation. Again, he was an Anglo-Saxon monk who, if you want to know anything about the early Christianity in the British Isles, he's the man. Anyway, he too believed the Antichrist would be a Jew from the tribe of Dan, born in Babylon. Bede seems to have held to a rapture and return to rule on the earth. You have to read that for it, but here's a quote. The church, which has been redeemed by the blood of Christ and gathered from the nations, he shows them in heaven by saying they will reign on earth. So in the midst of this Antichrist raging, he will show the saints heaven. Doesn't say 7 years, but in other words, the saints are going to go into heaven. Doesn't say how long, but then they're going to come back to reign on the earth with him. It's amazing how the Venerable Bede is so venerated by Anglicans, but yet I don't think any of these Anglicans have read Bede's commentary on the book of Revelation. Anyway, let's go on. Some interpret the two prophets to be Enoch and Elijah. This is a quote from him, by the way. Some people say the two prophets in the book of Revelation are Enoch and Elijah. They will preach for 3.5 years, strengthen the hearts of the faithful against the perfidy of the Antichrist that is soon to come. And when they are killed, his ferocity will rage. When at last the saints who fought the protection of the hiding, who through the protection of their hiding places were thought to be dead. So while the Antichrist is raging, the saints will be in hiding places. I'd like to think it was heaven, but he just said hiding places. But, and of course not be found. People will think they're just dead. What happened to them? They're in hiding places. Can you call that the rapture?
Gummerlock has a lot of...
Right, Gummerlock. Right. I'm going to get into Gummerlock. He's actually a friend of mine. You'd be amazed at what he's doing. He's an amillennial scholar, and he lives in Colorado. In fact, he's a Latin instructor at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and also at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And he calls me up and says, "Hey, let's meet for coffee." And I said, "What have you got?" He said, "I found some more pre-trib stuff. I think you'll be excited about it." And he's found lots of pre-trib stuff. I'm getting to it, so be patient with me on that. I would say he's our friend, even though he's all mill. I'm working on him, don't worry. But as a matter of fact, he and I were going to try to form a panel for the ETS, and his paper was accepted and mine wasn't. And
that's more that persecution against the dispensation.
Right. We both do eschatology. They accepted him because he was all mill, but they didn't accept me. I'm starting to think. Well, we'll get to that. Maybe my conclusion will.
We'll let Brandon figure out who is coming after you.
Okay. Well, I do know this. ETS next November is going to be in Denver, and Colorado Christian University is going to be hosting it. And so I'm going to say, hey, if you're going to come to my town, you better let me speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's dominion in the name of Jesus.
But we got to get moving. Okay. Now, let's just skip down to the last two lines. After hiding, the saints who are in their hiding places, wherever they may be, then are gathered from all nations and taken to heaven. The saints would then follow Christ to the final battle against the kings of the earth. Once again, the saints are kept in a hiding place, and sometime during that hiding place, they're whisked away into heaven. Doesn't say how long, but then they come back with Christ to rule on earth. At the great battle, they'll be there. In other words, when the saints come marching in, where are they going to come marching in from? Heaven. If they're coming back during the Battle of Armageddon, and they're coming out of heaven with Jesus, and they're going to be in white garments, they must have been the bride who's been dressed in the white garments. Are you following this? And of course, they've got to be in heaven long enough to be prepared with the white garments, preparation of the bride. And then there's going to be a wedding, and there's going to be a wedding supper. I think it'd probably take about 7 years for all that. What do you think? Or 3.5. Anyway, well, we've got to keep moving on. So even the Venerable Bede has this idea of the saints going to heaven and then coming back at the Battle of Armageddon in the train of Christ. That is a trend throughout church history, in spite of the fact that the Amill or the Post-Mill and all these other people are telling you something different. We've got church history on our side. Don't believe these guys, McPherson and people like that. We've got church history on our side. The more I study church history, the more firm I am in the restoration of Israel promised. Throughout church history, the rapture, really our understanding of dispensationalism is far more historical. I mean, I'm amazed the more I dig in and the more I find. Well, let's go to the 9th and 10th centuries. Throughout church history, I promised, Pseudo-Hippolytus. Now, he tried to be Hippolytus, but he probably wrote about the 9th century. Hippolytus wrote in the 3rd century, late 2nd century even, early 3rd century, about 300. And this guy, about 850 probably. And it's all we have is a Syriac manuscript. But Antichrist will be from the tribe of Dan, who gathers and restores Israel, rebuilds the temple in Jerusalem. Enoch and Elijah will preach against the Antichrist, then they'll be killed. Then they'll be killed halfway through, and he desecrates the temple, as Antichrist does, halfway through the 7 years. Demands that people all take his mark, but Christ returns, resurrects the dead, the earth is burnt up. So I would say that's not going to be a pre-trib, but it's still the same story that you hear from everyone in the first 1,000 years of Christianity. Let's go to Adso of Monteiro there, about 950, just before the Crusades. A Benedictine abbot in Burgundy, eastern France, one of the foremost writers of the 10th century. He's cited and read widespread just before the Crusades. The Antichrist will be born among the Jewish people out of the tribe of Dan, born of the city of Babylon, will restore the temple of Solomon, will go to, notice, restoring the temple, the Jews returning to Israel. All of these are talking about the restoration of Israel, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the temple throughout church history. Maybe I should just skip over my section I've got on the restoration of Israel, since everybody's talking about it. Anyway, moving on, he cites then 2 Thessalonians 2 and says Antichrist cannot take power until a defection has come first. A defection. Anyway, I guess the apostasia. Anyway, the Christian kingdoms then defect, which hasn't happened yet, he says. Notice it hasn't happened yet, he can't be preterist. By the way, just a tangent here. I did not find a preterist anywhere. In fact, Jerome, in his commentary on the book of Daniel, says that the only person that he knows, there are a few heretics and pagans who claim that it's Antiochus. But all the church fathers say it's the Antichrist. And if it could be Antiochus, he's just a type of the Antichrist to come. And then Jerome says that Porphyry was a pagan that was debating and claiming that all the stuff in Daniel is just Antiochus, it's already passed. My point, in the early church, the only preterists I found were pagans and heretics. And all the church fathers believed were futurists. Now, maybe someone can find a church father that wasn't, but I've got a lot on my side and I haven't found any on theirs. So don't apologize and go after those preterists. They're the historical people. We're the historical people. And you've heard it from a historian. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's move down to Enoch and Elijah will preach 3.5 years, converting the Jews. There'll be a golden age until Antichrist takes Jerusalem, desecrates the temple, kills Enoch and Elijah, begins a 3.5-year tribulation. Same theme over and over. Killing Christians who won't apostatize, 666, until Christ, he said, or St. Michael. Of course, some people think St. Michael is Christ. I won't get into that debate. But he said some people think it's St. Michael and not Christ. Return to slay the Antichrist, and then Judgment Day. Is my time up now? I'm doing okay.
Halfway through.
Halfway through. Okay, I got to pick up my steam. I'm going to go faster. Now, I'm going to go really quick on this slide. About the time of the Crusades, or just before, actually, we get this idea that there will be a last godly emperor who will fight Gog and Magog. The Tiburtine Sibyl, which is actually 4th century, the Sibyls were pagan prophecies during the Roman Empire, and at the time of Constantine, we know that Constantine made a synthesis of Christianity and Roman paganism. I won't elaborate too much on what that became, but the same thing with the Sibyls. The Sibyls, which were pagan prophecies, continued in the Christian period, but they were baptized into Christianity, like everything else was at the time of Constantine. And at this Sibyl, this Sibyl was very popular in medieval Europe. That said that there would be the last godly Roman emperor who converts the heathen and the Jews, but Gog and Magog will invade from kind of the northeast, from Russia, maybe Slavic areas, I don't know. But he defeats them. Then he goes to Jerusalem and lays down his crown to God and dies. But the Antichrist will then take over and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Maybe I shouldn't go into this story. It's not biblical, but it was a very popular medieval myth about this last Pseudo-Methodius. Not the true Methodius, but a guy that called himself Methodius. Maybe his name was Methodius. It was a common name. But some people thought he was the real Methodius. But anyway, they said a last Roman emperor would drive out invading Ishmaelites from the south, who were Ishmaelites. In fact, you know why we know this is not Methodius? Methodius wrote before Muhammad. And this is a guy called Methodius who said it's going to be the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, who will invade the Roman Empire. And it's got to be, he's got to be influenced by the fact that the Arabs really invaded the Roman Empire, I would say. Anyway, but then Gog and Magog enter from the north, that's it, and driven out by St. Michael. Then the emperor will go to Jerusalem, lay down his crown, die, ending the Roman Empire, and then the Antichrist will take over, because the Antichrist always takes over when the Roman Empire ends. Of course, in my 17th, 18th century dispensation before Darby, I ran into a lot of people that said the Roman Empire hasn't ended. The papacy is still the Roman Empire. Rome is still ruling. And when the papacy collapses, that's when the Antichrist is taking over. Of course, other people say the papacy is the Antichrist because when the Roman Empire collapsed, the papacy took over and they are the Antichrist. There's so many different theories out there, and I've read them all. Anyway, but I guess what we have to do is go to Scripture to try to find out rather than all the speculations of people throughout church history. Now, the Emperor Friedrich Barbarossa in the Third Crusade, along with Richard the Lionhearted, they went in the Third Crusade, but Barbarossa drowned in a river on the way to the Holy Land. He was in black armor, and all the horses and men were crossing the river at the same time. He fell in the murky water, and they couldn't find him for about an hour before they found him down in the murky water from all the hooves of the horses, and he was dead. But there's this myth that he is that last Roman emperor. You say, Friedrich Barbarossa wasn't a Roman emperor. Yes, he was. He was descended of Charlemagne, and his title was the Holy Roman Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. By the way, this idea of a godly Roman emperor conquering the East is why Hitler in World War II called his invasion of Russia Operation Barbarossa. And by the way, throughout the Middle Ages, whenever there was a barbarian invasion from Asia, be it the Goths, the Vandals, the Huns, the Arabs, the Magyars, the Vikings, they were all called Gog and Magog, coming from the north to invade. But anyway, but the idea of the Jewish Antichrist was not only dominant, but I would say it was universal from the 2nd to the 9th century, and then it disappears. In its place comes the papal Antichrist. Now you think maybe Luther and Calvin came up with the idea of the papal Antichrist, but actually it had a long history, a good 500 years before Luther and Calvin. Arnulf of Rheims in 991, who was actually the illegitimate son of the last Carolingian king, who was given a bishopric, of course, but was then deposed. When he was deposed, he called the Pope Antichrist because I guess he was being fired. You know, someone who's lost their job would probably turn against their boss and call him the Antichrist. He was later actually restated when there was a different pope, reinstated. But he said that the Pope was sitting in God's temple in Rome, showing himself to be God, and therefore he must be the Antichrist. Now that's the earliest example I found of a papal Antichrist, 991. But of course, throughout the investiture struggle, I don't know if you know who the Guelphs and the Ghibellines are. The Guelphs were the faction that was always pro-Pope, and the Ghibellines were anti-Pope and pro-Holy Roman Emperor. And whenever, the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope had a squabble, one party would take one side, one party the other, and the Ghibellines were always saying, well, that's why we're following the Holy Roman Empire, because in Rome, that's the Antichrist. And the Ghibellines regularly identified the Pope as Antichrist. Along comes Bernard of Clairvaux and Hildegard of Bingen, who both said that they had visions of an anti-Pope. Both of them had dreams that the last Pope would be the Antichrist. Have you heard that? Anyone heard that theory? And many people are saying, if we're in the last days, maybe the current Pope, the Argentine, Francis, could be the Antichrist. And I actually have some very conservative Catholic friends who are very unhappy with Francis, and they're speculating whether this could be that last Pope who's going to be the Antichrist. And you go, they didn't get that from Scripture. No, they didn't. They got it from a vision by Bernard of Clairvaux. Saint Bernard, the dogs are named after him. Right. Actually, the dog's named after the pass, which is named in the Alps, which is named after Saint Bernard. Anyway, and Hildegard of Bingen, she was also a mystic that had the same vision. I think they knew each other, so it could have been that they were in cahoots. But anyway, and that this false Pope, the Antichrist at the end, would lead astray 2/3 of the Roman Catholic Church. By the way, they were wise enough to not call the current Pope the Antichrist, but it would be some future Pope. Anyway, now let's go to Joachim, where is he? Joachim of Fiore, and also the rigorous Franciscans. A couple generations after St. Francis, there was a split in the Franciscan order. The more moderate Franciscans who wanted to kind of liberalize, every group starts liberalizing after a while. Every college drifts toward liberalism unless it's yanked back or anchored firmly to the Word of God. But anyway, and the rigorous were the more strict Franciscans. They were also called Capuchins, right? Famous for their coffee that has got steamed milk in it. Cappuccino, right. Pardon?
The little hoods.
Right, the friars minor, I guess you'd call it, yeah.
Capuchin was the hood. They always wore their hoods.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Maybe that's where they got the name Capuchins. But anyway, we got to keep moving. So Antichrist will chastise and destroy the corrupt, worldly Roman church. So Joachim of Fiore was not in with the established church. And he said that the Roman Catholic Church had become worldly, and that there would be a glorious renewal, an age of the Spirit in which the church would return again to its godly roots because the Catholic Church had lost its way. By the way, about the same time, we have the Cathari, or the Albigensians, who were calling the Pope the Antichrist, and then the Waldensians, who were calling the Pope the Antichrist. But those people influenced by Joachim and Bernard of Clairvaux and Hildegard of Bingen were Brother Arnold of Swabia, who was a Dominican, but he claimed that the Roman Antichrist would be defeated by Christ, and a future Pope once again would be the Antichrist. The Flagellants, who were people during the medieval period that would beat themselves, right? And actually they were on the outs with the Catholic Church as well, influenced by Joachim, the rigorous, all the rest. and did the same thing. The Pope. So this Pope is the Antichrist is centuries before Luther and Calvin. Then the Lollards, the followers of John Wycliffe, same thing. And the Taborites, which were the followers of John Huss, identified the Pope as the Antichrist. And then we've got the Reformers, Luther, Zwingli, Butzer, Calvin, the Anabaptists, and all of the 16th century Reformers, and all the early Puritans called the Pope the Antichrist. But again, don't think that the Reformers came up with this idea. Now, from my book, I actually showed this once before, but I have 3 pages of identities of the Antichrist, the King of the North and King of the South, and Gog and Magog. And I just pages and pages of all the sources that I have in my book, Dispensation Before Darby, in the 17th and 18th century, who've identified. And the funny thing is, in the 16th century and the early 17th, it's always the Pope, the Pope, the Pope. And then you get a couple people saying maybe the Turks. But as the Turks became a greater threat, especially when Suleiman the Magnificent besieged Vienna in 1683, all of a sudden everybody was thinking that the Ottoman Empire, the Turks were the Antichrist. And you see a Pope in Rome, and then gradually you get Muhammad is the Antichrist. The Turk is the Antichrist. And then kind of a mixture as you go through the later 1600s. But by the 1700s, you have a majority of people saying the Muslims would be the Antichrist, or Muhammad is the Antichrist, or the Sultan the Turkish Sultan in Istanbul. Once again, identifying more and more a Muslim Antichrist. It really isn't until the late 1700s that the majority start coming to the idea that the Antichrist will be a future individual. Some individuals identified Louis XIV, who built the Palace of Versailles and was taking French armies to expand and fight throughout Europe. He was called the Antichrist. And then when Napoleon came, big time, almost everybody said Napoleon was the Antichrist. And after Napoleon, I would say easily the majority thought that someone like Napoleon, or Mussolini, or Hitler, or Barack Obama, or Trump, some future individual would be the Antichrist. Oh, Tim LaHaye also held, I think, to that position, that it was a future political person as an individual Antichrist, rather than the papacy or the Muslim world or something like that. But at least you can see that trend. Now you've had the entire history of what people thought of about the Antichrist. Let's go to the hope for the restoration of Israel. There's not too much, at least scholars say there's not too much before Chrysostom and Beza. But the scholars, including this one here, published by Yale University Press, said that, the early church, everybody was thinking that Israel would be restored. But Chrysostom became very anti-Israel, that's a subject for another talk, and tried to do all he could to drum out messianic ideas from the church through his influence. And between Chrysostom and Beza, things were pretty thin. And then, as was said earlier, Beza, in his notes in the Geneva Bible, suggested that there would be a restoration of the Jews. And that got things really going just in time for my dispensational before Darby period, where my book is just full with Puritans saying that, because they followed in the footsteps of Beza. Mainly because many of those Puritans had to flee England during Bloody Mary. They went to Geneva to study for those few years Bloody Mary was ruling and killing a whole lot of people. And then when, of course, Bloody Mary died and Elizabeth I came to the throne, they returned from Geneva filled full of actually Beza's ideas, and the Geneva Bible. And I would say really jump-started eschatology. So no, Luther and Calvin were not eschatologically interested. They continued to buy the Catholic Church narrative on eschatology. But I think Beza started it, and then the Puritans picked it up and carried it, and really brought eschatology back into center of, and a real serious literal study of the Word of God. And a love for Israel, by the way. How many Puritans gave their children Hebrew names? Zechariah, Zephaniah, Habakkuk. I mean, have you read the names of many Puritans? And anyway, let's move on. Now let's go to the restoration of Israel. Tertullian expects the restoration of Israel. What matters it to me, provided there is also a resurrection of the body. This is his on the resurrection of the flesh. There is a resurrection of the Jewish state. Just as there is a resurrection of the Jewish state, there will be a resurrection of the dead. And if you believe in the resurrection, then you have to believe that there's a resurrection of the Jewish state. And he said it was prefigured in the reincorporation and reunion of the bones in Ezekiel 37. And he cites 37. He said that the bones coming together, the valley of dry bones, is the restoration of Israel. Tertullian. By the way, this is before Constantine and Chrysostom turned the church against Israel, or a hope for a resurrection of Israel. I'm going to skip because I'm going to run out of time. He also said, almost exhort God when he restores in amnesty what he took away in wrath. God is always taking away in wrath and then returning and restoring. And then he said, what a God that is merciful even down to Hades. As for the restoration of Judea, which even the Jews themselves believe, the hope is described in another work. Anyway, by the way, the work he's describing is not extant. Okay, Victorinus of Petrovium. He's that Slovenian guy we talked about before. He said that I sent to you Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the sons. That is the time of the calling to recall the Jews to faith. So that expectation of the recalling, which will be done through the preaching of Elijah. Post-Nicene expectation. Ambrosiaster expects a time when the full number of the Gentiles has admitted, then the darkness will be taken away from the eyes of the Jews and they will believe. Jerome, in the latter days the Lord will gather the called remnant from the people of Judah and will return the captives of Judah to Jerusalem. Again, throughout all these church fathers, they mention a future restoration of Israel where Jerusalem will be rebuilt, the temple will be rebuilt. Cyril of Alexandria, Patriarch of Alexandria, by the way, Israel will be saved in its own time. It will be called in the end after the calling of the Gentiles, which is very clear from Romans 11. And anyone that reads Romans 11 should get it. Theodoret of Syr, after the Gentiles accepted the gospel, the Jews would believe when the great Elijah would come to them and bring them to the faith. Let's go to Caesarea of Arles. About 520, bishop in southern France. Arles is a town in southern France. The woman who fled into the desert in Revelation 9, is it? No, 11. 12, thank you. Right, 12, yeah. I'm not a theologian, I'm a historian. Anyway, the woman who fled into the desert is the church in which the synagogue will come to believe in at the end of time when Elijah comes. The two wings are the two prophets, Elijah and someone else. He doesn't identify Enoch, but Elijah and someone else who will exercise authority 42 months until, of course, they're killed. The last persecution then will follow. Then it says, it speaks of all, namely those who dwell on the earth, not those who dwell in heaven. He said that the church in those days will be Jews who are converted and who dwell on earth, but some will be dwelling, the church, part of the church will be dwelling in heaven. I wish he mentioned the rapture, but maybe I should look at that closer and see if it's in there somewhere. But he says that some saints will be dwelling in heaven and others will be on the earth during the tribulation. And so you pick up these glimmerings of a pre-trib rapture, but when I get to the rapture, I'll show you that there really are some solid stuff, though. Okay, Andrew of Caesarea, Cappadocia. What is more likely to those from the Jews who are saved at the consummation when, as the apostle puts it, after the full number of the Gentiles come in, all Israel will be saved? The Jews in the diaspora of the earth are saved in the last days. And then the Venerable Bede, in his commentary on the Apocalypse, the hour of temptation of the Jews at the time of Antichrist are indicated during this persecution. Certainly those of the Jews through the teaching of the great prophet Elijah being incorporated with members of the church, they will believe. So members of the church will still be here. Maybe it's a partial rapture, because some of them aren't going to be around. Some of them will be in heaven. Now, I really recommend this book if you want to do a study. This is Abba Hillel Silver, who wrote a pretty extensive work on all the expectations of Jews throughout history of their restoration. He has some false messiahs. He has, movements of when are we going to be restored. But he really shows that throughout the 2,000 years of Jewish history since Christ, that the Jews have looked for. It's called a history of the messianic speculation in Israel. But again, we're not doing Jewish theology here. We're doing Christian theology. I'm going to wrap up the rapture. How many minutes do I have?
10 more, and then we'll have 15 minutes of questions.
Q&A. Okay, so 10 minutes to do the rapture. I saved the best till last, and I've got to rush through it.
1 minute. Just kidding.
Okay. Anyway, you know what I'll do? I've got all this pre-wrath rapture. Some of them could be pre-trib, but I'm going to skip over them because their time is short. Irenaeus, look it, they are both ignorant of God's dispensations. Irenaeus is saying some people are ignorant of God's dispensations and the mystery of the resurrection of the just. Now God made promise of the earth to Abraham and his seed, yet neither Abraham nor his seed now receive it, but they shall receive it at the resurrection of the saints. Wait, so when the saints are resurrected, then the Jews shall get their land. The Jews shall be restored. Isn't that what he said? Now God promised the earth to Abraham and his seed. And Abraham and his seed are going to get the earth when the saints are resurrected. Sounds to me like there's the rapture, and then God turns to the Jews for that last week of Daniel. Of course, he doesn't spell it out as much as I'd like it to, but hey, it's a lot closer to us than it is to those all-millennial or post-millennial folks. I didn't get to... Commodanius said that the flame avoids the camp of the saints. So the earth will burn up, but it won't burn up where the saints are. Of course, he doesn't say where the saints are. Maybe it's a pre-wrath. Anyway, Lactantius. You've got to read my work because I'm running out of time to really get this in more depth. I've just got to go too fast. Then the righteous shall go forth to their hiding places. So, notice, and then the earth will be burned up. Methodius of Olympus, the real Methodius, not the pseudo, about 300. Souls made safe and sealed shall be preserved from the wrath. Doesn't say where. Apocalypse of Thomas, they shall be lifted up into the air on a cloud of light and shall go with me rejoicing into heaven, the 6th day. And on the 7th day shall mine elect be brought out by the holy angels for the destruction of the world. So maybe it's just a day. We're resurrected, and a day later we come back, is the best I can figure. More pre-trib, pre-wrath. I did that. Okay. Julian of Toledo, the Venerable Bede. I'll just skip to Venerable Bede. When the Lord descends from the judgment, the saints are immediately caught up to meet him in the air. Fire then will then cover the surface of the earth. We can skip over that. St. Brendan believed that the saints would be taken across the Atlantic Ocean to the other side, to America, I guess. And that's the first I found where America will be the place of rescue, where we'll be safe from the Antichrist. The Puritans thought of that idea. Increase Mather thought that the holy, the righteous, would go to America to avoid the raging of the Antichrist. Anyway, Theodore the Studite, let's skip these guys and let's go on. Bruno if you want to read them, I mean, but they're all pre-wrath, and we don't want to read. Let's go to pre-trib. The shepherd of Hermas has a glimmering of pre-trib. You have escaped a great tribulation, which is a type of the great tribulation which is to come. If the tribulation they escaped here is a type of the tribulation to come, then maybe we will escape the tribulation to come, if it's a type. Anyway, and you say, you're digging pretty deep for that. No, I think it makes sense to me. Irenaeus of Lyon. Okay, we've talked about him already. When in the end that church will suddenly be caught up from this, it is said there will be tribulation such as never been. In other words, the earth will be caught up, and then there will be tribulation. That's my reading of the passage. You can go to it in the footnotes there and see if I'm getting too much out of it or not. Apocalypse of Elijah. The Antichrist will arrive on the world scene, will claim to be Christ, will set himself up in Jerusalem, Enoch and Elijah, blah, blah, blah. But the angels from heaven will snatch up those having the seal of God on their hands and foreheads, remove them from the wrath, and lead them to paradise. There, raptured saints will receive white robes and dwell in safety from the Antichrist. After this, Christ will return with the saints and reign for 1,000 years on earth. Shepherd of Hermas. I mean, someone should have, that's a pretty clear rapture. Did you run across this in the Shepherd of Hermas? Oh, I'm sorry. Everything I'm getting, he already knows it all.
Well, so far,
I thought I was discovering it for the first time. Okay, we got to keep moving. Okay. Oh, by the way, I got that really from Gummerlock, who found it. Gummerlock said it's not pre-wrath, but pre-trib. And in the words of Gummerlock, its purpose is specifically related to removal from the wrath of Antichrist and escape from the tribulation, which shows a close affinity to the pre-tribulational view. Okay, let's go on to Victorinus of Petrovic. Actually, this is the Slovenian guy. In his commentary on the Apocalypse, he said that Revelation 6:14, he commented and said, the heaven withdrew as a scroll that is rolled up. This is in Revelation 6, and he thinks that's the rapture. He says, for the heaven will be rolled away. That is, the church shall be taken away. The good will be removed to avoid the persecution. Have you run across that one yet? Okay, I want to find one that Tommy doesn't know. Anyway, Victorinus. And what he says is, in Revelation 6, so the rapture's in Revelation 6, and then we got the rest of Revelation without the church. But he interprets, probably wrongly, that heaven rolled up as a scroll is the church being taken to heaven. How he got that, I don't know, but it's still pre-trib rapture, so. Medieval expectations of a pre-trib rapture. Caesarea of Aros, about 520, bishop in South France. After 3.5 years of the witnesses is the rapture. Here's the quote. Come up hither, and they went up into heaven in a cloud. The apostle spoke of this when he said, we shall be caught up in the clouds together to meet Christ. He ties in the rapture of Enoch and Elijah halfway through the tribulation in Revelation to 1 Thessalonians 4, where we will be caught up together, the dead in Christ shall rise. The rapture verse, our favorite rapture verse from 1 Thessalonians, he ties in with, so when Enoch and Elijah raptured, we're going to. Halfway through, okay, Pseudo-Ephraim. We've already done that, but I just don't want to read the quote. For all the saints and elect of God are gathered prior to the tribulation that is to come, and are taken to the Lord lest they see the confusion that is to overwhelm the world because of our sins. Aspringus of Beja, he promises that he will preserve his church in the last times, when the demon, enemy of the human race, will come to tempt those who live on the earth. How will he save us? From the Antichrist. He doesn't go into that. Brother Dulcino has also been shared here, so I should go really fast. 3.5 years, transferred to paradise, Enoch and Elijah, and they're preserved in paradise unharmed from the persecution of the Antichrist. By the way, Brother Dulcino from the Apostolic Brethren were one of those monk groups that were rebelling against Rome, and they got in a lot of trouble from Rome for that. Okay, now there's a mid-trib rapture, and I would say that's just as good. Tertullian, Tychonius, Primasius, Methodius. I wish I could go into some of them, and I know that he's going to shut me off right now. I got to go to Tertullian. Up to the present moment, they have not tribe by tribe smitten their breasts, looking upon him whom they have pierced. In other words, the Jews, the Zechariah passage about the Jews, it hasn't happened yet. No one has yet bewailed the downfall of Babylon. It hasn't fallen yet. No one has yet fallen in with Elijah. Where's Elijah? He hasn't happened yet. Right? No one has yet escaped from Antichrist yet. And the escape from Antichrist has to happen before Antichrist rages. Tychonius, the Lord promises that he will free every church that remains firm. Not the liberal churches, just the firm churches. And then Primasius, he speaks of the church flying in mid-heaven when she's going to possess the whole world. Anyway, let's go on to Methodius. The church shall be caught up and shall go in the clouds to meet the Lord. When? He ties it with the woman in the wilderness. That when the woman in the wilderness is removed from the Antichrist, that's the church being taken into heaven. I see the rapture there. Andrew of Caesarea is loaded. A whole page on him, if you don't mind. By the hour of trial, he speaks either of the persecution against the Christians that occurred almost immediately after the Rome fell, or the universal coming of Antichrist against the faithful at the end of time. And this coming, he pledges to free those. Christ pledges to free those who are zealots, for they will beforehand be seized upward by a departure from there, lest they be tempted beyond that which they are able to endure. So that tempting during the tribulation will be so great that God will have mercy on his church and will translate them into heaven. The appearance of the Antichrist, those who are faithful and trustworthy, 3.5 years, Enoch and Elijah. Let's go. Look at the saints are caught up in the midst of temptations, lest they be subdued. In the midst, mid-trib rapture, I would say, and will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. The 3.5 years are reckoned as the 1,260 days during which the apostasy will rage. So the apostasy is raging on earth, and the church has already been translated into heaven. So we look at the last quote, so that it might lead them to heaven. So the church has nothing to fear from the raging of Antichrist. We're going to miss it because we're going to be in heaven. Rapture, verse after verse, source after. I've got more sources of pre-trib rapture. You can find them in Gummerlock, and I've got the footnotes if you want to read them on your own. And then post-trib rapture, we don't need to do that, do we? So I'm going to go to my conclusion. The church must be in heaven long enough at least for a wedding, for a supper, and then return to earth with Christ in fine linen. And that Asprisia Beja says that, Primasius of Hadrumentum, and even the Venerable Bede. Let's do the Venerable Bede. The church, which has been redeemed by the blood of Christ, are gathered from the nations, and he shows them in heaven by saying, they shall reign on the earth. The armies that are in heaven follow Christ down to earth. In pure white bodies, the church imitates Christ. Because of the struggle of her battle, she has the right to be received as an army. We will be an army returning with Christ from heaven, which means we have to be in heaven before we return. And therefore, the rapture has to take place long enough, at least, for a preparation of the bride, a wedding, a supper. My conclusion. We dispensationalists expect and speculate a lot upon apocalyptic events, like the restoration of Israel, rapture, Antichrist, Armageddon, second coming. Anti-dispensationalists disparage them. They ridicule us. How do I know? I'm on a faculty where I'm the only dispensationalist, and I'm not a theologian, although the theologians are... I'm not saying they're liberal. They all love Moeller from Southern Seminary in Kentucky. In fact, almost every new hire we've had recently, especially in theology and even the social sciences, have come from Moeller's seminary. So I guess we're Southern West. Anyway, and I'm the only voice in the wilderness. I often tell them, I'm the only one around here who hasn't bowed their knee to Baal. Anyway, sometimes I joke with them, but they know my position. Therefore, it is those who mock us who are new. If they say dispensationalism is new, baloney. The ones who mock us are new. They're influenced by modernism and liberalism. Because throughout the history, when the church really clings to the truth, they agree with us. Maybe not to the extent we have, because they're glimmerings, but they're there with us. And finally, apocalyptic literature is always produced by the oppressed. When the church is oppressed, and the early church, they were premillennial. When the church became triumphant with Constantine and the Pope, they were not. Except for the little groups who were persecuted by the church. And then, with the Puritans, brought it back again. And dies out in times of optimism and prosperity. Optimism and prosperity kill the church. Wait, the gates of hell aren't supposed to prevail against the church. But I'll tell you what, the gates of pleasure, the gates of prosperity seem to. Okay, anyway, we could go into examples of that. You can read that on your own. But this is my last slide, I promise. Even though I have some other slides later I wanted to get to if I had time. We don't have time. So my last slide, I promise, Tommy. Okay, actually the first two quotes came from Tommy. When he read my text and everything beforehand, he goes, these two quotes, but you're going good. So really I have to give him all the credit. Down to the Enlightenment, biblical apocalyptic was read with seriousness throughout Christendom. But as skepticism and rationalism gained ground in the 18th century, the academic and popular views, in other words, liberalism, modernism, destroyed eschatology. We are the true church, and we have the true history of eschatology behind us, not them. And then the second quote, by the way, the first one was from Harvard University Press. This is from Oxford University Press. Prophecy has now ceased to be of importance, except on the fringes of modern civilization. Folks, we are on the fringes of modern civilization. But you know what? We've got to win the battle. We will win the battle, but I think we should be more aggressive in bringing back dispensationalism, trying to get our papers read at ETS, for example. Perhaps we might say that only when intelligent and educated men cease to take prophecy seriously, a change of we must not be the intelligent and educated men because we're still taking prophecy seriously. But can I say, throughout history, intelligent people did until modernity and liberalism. And finally, the last quote. About a month ago, John Woodbridge, professor of church history at Trinity Evangelical Seminary. Anyone know John Woodbridge or know of him? Anyway, he spoke at our school, and during Q&A, someone asked him, what is the greatest threat to Christian colleges? And he said, the greatest threat to Christian colleges and seminaries is professors' desire for academic respectability. And eschatology is not academically respectable. And that is why I think ETS doesn't let us speak there. And I think we should do something to change that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just say that all views, whether mid-trib, so-called pre-rap, all believe that, including pre-trib, that you're going to be taken out before the wrath of God.
Right.
So,
all of it believe that we don't see the wrath.
right. So, and also, most of the people in the Middle Ages thought the tribulation was only 3.5 years. And so it's hard to know.
And they didn't get it from 7 years of Daniel, they got it from the 3.5, but 7 years of Revelation and the witnesses.
Yes. Go ahead.
Do you find anything that in those old writings that supports the view that the child caught up to heaven could have been the church in Christ? Revelation 3.
There were some that mentioned that. The shout into heaven. You said
No, the child who was caught up to heaven.
the child. That was
Revelation 12.
Revelation 12.
So I meant 12 verse 3.
Okay,
Sorry,
I
chapter
did-
12 verse 3.
I did run into that. Yeah, I guess I don't have a quote handy for you. It wasn't a regular occurrence, but I know of at least 3 or 4 cases.
I mean, if we could prove that that's what that meant, that would be, other than 2 Thessalonians 2, which I think we really should work on too. Those are verses that prove a pre-trib rapture very clearly. And I was just wondering if you saw any of that in ancient writers.
Not a majority, but I would say at least 3 or 4 of my 80 sources.
Yeah, Darby held that view originally.
Okay.
And he shifted around 1845 away from that.
Another question? I answered all your questions already. Well, I could go and if I have more time, I'll just go to the next slide.
Just a moment, let me check here. You got 6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay.
Let her rip, Tater Chip.
Golly, no more questions. Okay, go ahead.
I'm thinking of the Church of Philadelphia in the book of Revelation, Church of Philadelphia. I'm trying to recall I haven't had a chance to review the scripture right
I
quick.
know the one too, and I did run, there were at least a half a dozen that believed that was the rapture, the guarantee of the rapture. Well,
And that,
310.
he has 310,
that's it, 310.
and it's,
Anyone know it by memory so we could?
yeah.
Because you have kept the word of my
David.
perseverance, I will keep you
David.
from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole earth, to test those who dwell upon the earth.
You will be removed, yeah, you will be,
I ran into at least 6, probably as many as 10 people that have mentioned that as a promise of a pre-trib rapture, or at least a rescuing from the wrath of God.
and how do you feel personally about that one yourself?
I believe it.
Thank
But
you.
again, I try to be a historian and not a theologian, leave the interpretation to the theologians. And I just
But you
did-
gotta feel it. It's gotta be something in the heart, right?
Yeah, but you're a pretty biased historian
Right.
because of your theology.
Right. But okay, I could talk about Francis Gummerlock then. As I said, he's all mill, but he's a friend of mine. In fact, we're getting together next week for coffee, and he's got a few more for me. And of course, I want all he can give to me, because a lot of my medieval, everything is in Latin that has not been translated into English, he's been finding, and it beefs up my story. And he's not afraid to help me beef up, my argument. Of course, he's told me, these medievalists and medieval folks, they're probably wrong anyway, because we have to go to the Scripture, and he believes the Scripture's all mill, but I'm working on him. But anyway, he just presented a paper at ETS 2 weeks ago. The one that I was supposed to, you were there. Did you hear his paper? Oh, great. And I want to sum up that paper if I have a few minutes then. Some medieval Christians, I'm quoting him, held to that the faithful will be safe from the Antichrist. The development of the Pre-Trib Rapture in medieval Christianity, presented at ETS November of 2017. Francis Gummerlock, he said that there are people in all of these stories he has, which are dozens. Not dozens, at least 18 to 20. That's not quite dozens.
Yeah, he told Mark Hitchcock and I years ago that he has 3 file drawers full of medieval pre-trib rapture literature.
And he's found more since then. He keeps finding them, which I'm really thankful for. Anyway, people always hide. And of course, he gets it from Matthew 24, flee to the mountains. When you see these things, flee to the mountains. And then in Revelation 12, the woman who's flying into the wilderness is often considered the rapture. And not always is the rapture to heaven. It could be just to the wilderness or to America, St. Brendan thought. And then finally, people hiding in caves and holes is found in Isaiah 2, Isaiah 26, Hosea 10, Hebrew 11, and these are some of the sources that are quoted by these Latin manuscripts. Here's a Rapture to Paradise, Brother Dolcino. He wrote actually a full article on Brother Dolcino, but said, here's a quote from him, "The two ideas were closely connected. That is, the wrath of the Antichrist and the rescuing of the church from the Antichrist. Not improbable that the latter was an outgrowth of the former. In fact, in his story, he tends to say that the rapture actually developed in the Middle Ages. Therefore, it wasn't around in the early church. Of course, he just hasn't read the early church. He reads medieval. But I've got to get to him and show him all this early church stuff. So but he kind of thought that the rapture developed gradually from a hiding from the Antichrist in caves to a eagle carrying them into a desert place where they'd be protected, to St. Brendan, a disciple of St. Patrick, who, the church is taken to America. And finally, by Darby, he says, they're all taken to heaven in a rapture, and it's fully developed by Darby. And that's kind of his theme. So none of the things he's found are fully developed Darby ideas. But so what? To say it has to be 100% exactly just like Darby said to be dispensationalism, that's not fair. His idea is there in the Middle Ages. His idea is there in the Church Fathers. There's a sermon on the Antichrist and an Apocalypse of Pseudo-Shaduit, where he talks about, which have these early pre-trib rapture ideas. And then the Voyage of St. Brendan. This is where they are whisked away to America. There is this myth that St. Brendan and some Irish monks crossed the Atlantic 200 years before the Vikings did. And he talked about this land, lush land, across the sea. And that's why many people think that maybe the Irish were sailing, around Ireland and to Scotland and whatnot. And it could be that maybe long before Columbus or the Vikings, the Irish monks made it to America. Time's up.
Actually, the Phoenicians beat them to it during the time of Solomon. That's a whole nother discussion. But thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate that.